Today we're going to be answering a question that I get quite frequently on this channel, and that is, should you buy one of these as a running and driving car if you're looking to get one? Should you buy one blown up? Should you buy one of somebody's abandoned project that's been blown up and it's been sitting for a while? This question comes up quite frequently, and it's honestly a good question because you can potentially, let me highlight that word there, you can potentially save thousands of dollars by buying one of these blown up versus buying one from like a dealership or a private party that is running and driving. So I'd like to cover what I spent getting this one kind of to the stage that it's at. I still have a little bit more money to spend on it to get the flares and the hood painted, which we have a paint appointment at the paint shop already set up for March, where the car is going to go in and get painted and color matched and blended and all that stuff, so that way the flares look good on this car. So just to give a little bit of info about the car, this is my 2007 STI with 158,000 miles. I bought this car back in October of 2023 as a blown up shell that had sat for a while. When it comes to buying a blown up Subaru, there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind. You don't really know the extent of the damage to the car or to the engine up until you get that engine out and you get it torn down. When I bought this car, I was under the assumption that the cylinder heads may still be usable. I won't say 9 times out of 10, probably realistically 70% of the time the cylinder heads are still in a usable condition. Unfortunately for this car, the cylinder heads were not. The other thing is that if you're buying one that's blown up, obviously the short block is going to be ruined. When it comes to buying a blown up Subaru, there's a couple things that you don't absolutely have to, but it's like highly suggested that you do replace are any AVCS cam gears, AVCS solenoids, obviously the oil pump, depending on how much metal went through the oiling system, the turbo. Pretty much anything that oil touches could be damaged when it comes to buying one of these blown up. And the other aspect that you have to look at is when somebody goes to sell one of these cars when they're blown up, there's typically more wrong with them than just the engine. If somebody doesn't want to pour the money into it, there could be things wrong like blown out bushing, suspension's been cheaped out on, suspension could be broken, interior panels broken, exterior of the car may not be in the best condition. So keep in mind there's a lot of variables that you could run into when you do buy one of these blown up. But as you guys know, I buy a lot of my cars blown up or as somebody else's abandoned project. We've got the RX-7 that was a shell. We've got this 07 that was blown up. We had the Evo that I bought as a shell. So there's a lot of cars that you can get for a pretty good deal when you do buy them blown up. But 9 times out of 10, they are gonna need more love than what you think they're gonna need. I'd like to kind of go over just a bare basic cost. If I had only wanted to put this car back to OEM spec and get it back on the road, that's kind of where I want to start, because I feel like that's where most people who are buying these cars blown up may end up going with it. If you're buying one blown up, like we mentioned, you're going to need a short block, your oiling components, a gasket kit, timing belt kit with a water pump, basic things. For an RA block, you can get those for roughly $2,400. I've seen them kind of vary in price across the internet. You're gonna need an OEM gasket and seal kit. The price for those can vary from chassis to chassis and generation to generation, but typically they're between $350 and $400. The one for this car is $394.17. For your cam gears, you're looking at a combined total of about $395 for a single AVCS car like this. That means that the lower exhaust gears are non-AVCS. So you only have 2 AVCS solenoids, 2 AVCS cam gears. If this was a dual AVCS car, you'd be looking at pretty much doubling the cost, looking at about $800 to $1,000 in cam gears alone. You're gonna need a new oil pump. Typically for these, we just use OEM Subaru 11mm oil pumps. Those come in at about $222. Machine shop cost, assuming that your cylinder heads are still in usable condition, because we're gonna assume best case scenario here, you just bought a blown up car, cylinder heads are still salvageable. For resurface and pressure tests and things like that, you're probably looking about $400, assuming that the valves and the valve springs and all that are still in good and usable condition. Machine shop for a flywheel resurface, if you don't wanna have to buy a new one, we're looking at like bare minimum cost. You are reusing what you got, machining what you can, and tossing it back on the car. About $100 for a flywheel resurface. And then a timing belt kit can range anywhere between $300 and $450. I found one for about $350. So assuming that we use what I bought my blown up STI for, which was $8,000, which was still a little bit high. $8,000 for the car for the bare basics. Assuming that the car doesn't have anything else wrong with it, which 9 times out of 10, there's always other stuff wrong with it, you're looking at a bare minimum of $4,382 in parts alone, assuming that you're doing all of the labor yourself. If you're paying a shop to do the labor for you, I'd expect between $3,000 and $4,000 for a short block replacement, which would bring the total cost for getting a blown up STI back on the road that you just purchased, around $12,382, which honestly isn't a terrible deal for these cars, but I've seen running and driving examples selling between $14,000 and $16,000 also, with some of the more cleaner ones going for up in the lower 20s. So if you genuinely wanted to buy a blown up one just to get it back on the road, or you buy a blown up one, fix it to flip it, you're probably looking at saving between $2,000 and $4,000 right now. STI prices in the future for these older generations could go up, for right now it's kind of what we're looking at. Now for mine, because this is a while you're in here case, and for me this is my permanent STI, my permanent EJ based car. Now like I said, the car is built for between 400 and 450 horsepower. Some people are going to argue with me that the RA short block shouldn't be used for that range. I am comfortable with it. It's my car. If it blows up, we will address that in the future. We have a Type RA short block in the car that comes in at about $2,400. Attached to that short block, we have a set of IAG 550 street heads. That's going to include the IAG valves, valve springs, GSC S1 camshafts, and brand new castings, because unfortunately the castings in this car were chewed up on both the cam journals and inside of the chamber for the valve. So could the heads have been used? Yes, if we send them to a machine shop, but I'd feel a lot more comfortable just using a new set of heads on. I mentioned earlier, OEM gasket and seal kit for this car came in at $394.17. For the oil pan, because obviously we're going to fix any potential oiling issues that this car may have. Killer Bee oil pan with their windage tray and pickup tube. If we're doing a motor build and we're doing any type of engine out service, I highly recommend doing that. Even if it's not just the Killer Bee pan, at least doing the Killer Bee oil pickup and windage tray. For us, we are using a Company 23 timing belt kit on here with an OEM water pump. I haven't heard back from Company 23 yet on the water pump that I had sent them back. They are looking into it now, so hopefully I should have some info on that for you guys soon. OEM 11mm Subaru oil pump on here. We have brand new OEM AVCS cam gears. For the oil pump, we're looking at $222. For the cam gears, came in at about $395. One thing to keep in mind with these older Subarus that are single AVCS, the exhaust cam gears on these cars are made out of a plastic composite, and with multiple heat cycles from the engine, age and miles, those cam gears can become brittle and fragile. I have seen some in the past explode the exhaust cam gears just from age. So while we were in there, we went ahead and did the RCM exhaust cam gears. They're just an alloy, I want to say aluminum cam gear, which obviously isn't going to explode. So it's a good upgrade to do. Those come in at about $265. Honestly, in my opinion, well worth it. One modification that we do on literally every single one of these cars is a fluid damper crank pulley. It's just a good thing to add in there, especially if you're turning the car up past stock power levels. It's just going to help absorb any of that unnecessary vibration and engine harmonics that you don't want going into the crankshaft. Is it 100% required and necessary? No, but is it a good thing to do? 100%. That thing came in at about $473. Now, since this car was pretty toasted when we got it, it did need a new flywheel and a new clutch. We probably could have resurfaced the stock flywheel. Actually, no, we couldn't, because it had an aftermarket one on there and it's pretty chewed through. So we just went ahead and did the ACT HDSS clutch kit. That is the standard for what I put on any of these modified cars. It is fully sprung. It is a little bit stiffer than factory, but it is a good clutch to be able to handle good power upgrades in the future if you're going to be doing it. Plus, while you have the engine out, doing the clutch at that time is obviously the best time to do it. For the exhaust on this car, I went with what you guys suggested, which was the Tomei on equal length. I personally prefer equal length manifolds. I've run them on every other Subaru I've ever had, but it is kind of nice having one of them with the Subaru rumble again. So there's gonna be no complaints there. That Tomei exhaust manifold with their up pipe comes in at about $801. The turbo is a Grimspeed BB500 turbo. The turbo is gonna be more than capable to be able to do the 400 to 450 wheel horsepower range that we're shooting for in this car. It's honestly a pretty responsive, good turbo. I've used it in the past. That turbo comes in at about $1,650. For the downpipe, a lot of people like to run catless downpipes on these cars. For any dedicated street car, I tend to lean more towards catalytic converters. The Cobb downpipe is typically the one that I'll always go with. They have a Gessie G Sport. I actually have those. I just bought 2 more of those catalytic converters for the 911. So they're good catalytic converters. I want to say they're 400 cell count. They flow very well. They are a little more on the pricey side, but they're not too bad. The downpipe comes in at about $995 for 02 to 07 WRXs, and I want to say they're a little bit more expensive for the 08 and plus. The catback, this is a new one for me. We decided to use the HKS carbon muffler catback. It looks great, it sounds great, it fits great. As a first time user of that catback, I would recommend it. Typically, I'll always use the Greddy RS on these ones. I've used Tomei in the past, and Tomei's a little bit loud for a daily driver in my opinion, but it does sound good. That HKS carbon fiber catback is actually relatively affordable at $895 compared to some of the competitors out there. Now, this one was purely nostalgia based for me. I've been around Subarus for the past 10 years. I've always wanted one with a Cosworth intake manifold. That intake manifold has been a huge pain in the ass to make fit on this car, but I've just always wanted one. I think they look cool. They've got just the Cosworth goodiness around them. And they did a limited run on them, so I figured since they're doing a limited run, I would pick one up, and that manifold came in at about $1,500. By no means do you need to do an intake manifold unless you're going for anything above like 600 plus horsepower in these cars. A stock manifold will work totally fine. But like I said, just for the nostalgia feel, it's one that I wanted. As you can see on here, we no longer have a top-mounted intercooler. We now run a Cobb front-mounted intercooler. I personally prefer the Cobb front mounts. ETS makes fantastic front mounts as well if you're looking at those. But for me, I like the Cobb ones mainly because I can still run the intake box with the intake on the Cobb stuff. You just have to trim up the box a little bit and the intercooler piping will fit right through there. It's just a nice addition to be able to have to keep your IAT temps down a little bit more. But that front mount is more on the expensive side, coming in about $1,925. For the turbo inlet on this car, it's a standard Perrin 2.4 inch turbo inlet. I think you can get those for around $270, $280, somewhere in that price range. I think, oh, on here I have that one for $283. So apparently that's what I paid for that one. I mentioned it for the fuel system. We are running a smaller injector. We have ID 1050s in there. Now I intentionally wanted 1050 so that way we couldn't turn the car up past a point of it being comfortable, mainly for short block limitations, because I know myself, if I have more injector and we can run more duty cycle, I will push that car as far as I can. I don't know why I do it, I just do it. I get excited when I see the car on the dyno. So I limited ourselves on that with a set of ID 1050s. Attached to those, we have Cobb fuel rails. Really, you can use any fuel rail out there that you choose. They're all relatively the same price, ranging from $200 to $300. The Cobb ones are about $275. Fuel pressure regulator. This is a first for me. We are using a Fuel Lab fuel pressure regulator. It is more on the affordable side at $193. The Aeromotive A1000s is what I've used in the past, and they're a little bit more on the expensive side, but honestly, you can't really go wrong with either one. It gets the job done, it regulates fuel pressure, you're gonna be good to go. For fuel lines, I build all my own fuel lines. I just buy some Dash 6 line and some fittings online. You can get all that stuff to be able to make your own fuel lines for about $200. There are kits out there that you can buy from I want to say IAG, Cobb, and some of these other companies that come with pre-made fuel lines, but I think they're up there in the $400 to $500 price range area. If you can make your own fuel lines and you're comfortable making it, I actually have a video somewhere on this channel of how to DIY make your own fuel lines using AM line. It can save you a couple $100. For the fuel pump, we have a single wall bureau 450. I decided to modify the stock fuel pump hanger so that way we didn't have to buy a radium hanger or an aftermarket fuel pump hanger to run a larger pump. The only reason I tossed a 450 in there is because we already had one sitting around. If you're using an AM 340 or something along those lines, or a Deechworks, I don't remember the model though. I haven't used Deechworks fuel pumps in a long time. If you're using one of those, it should be a plug and play, no problem. And for the most part, it should be more than enough fuel on pump gas for a little bit north of 400 horsepower. We are going to be turning up the boost a little bit. I did go ahead and upgrade the map sensor to a Cobb 4-bar map sensor. Those come in at about $215. Since it was a blown up engine, I forgot to factor this in earlier. AVCS solenoids, they're $90 each, so $180 for new AVCS solenoids. As you guys know, we toss an IAG AOS on these things. It just helps clean up and regulate the PCV system. I'm using the competition series because I don't like a lot of that crap going back into the turbo inlet, going into the turbo. If you're in a state that has to pass emissions, you have visual inspections, things like that, you're gonna wanna get the street series AOS. And then lastly, I decided to upgrade all the mounts on the car to Group N. Group N is probably my biggest recommendation for any car that is a street car, daily driver, anything like that. They're a little bit stiffer than the stock OEM Subaru mounts. I mean, the Group N are still OEM Subaru mounts, but they're kind of the STI hardened ones. They're very affordable too compared to a lot of aftermarkets. For the Group N pitch stop, you can pick those up for 80 bucks. For the engine mounts, I got those for 120. And for the trans mount, I got that for another 80. Now, I've obviously left some stuff out of this, like the Melee battery, because I repurposed that from my other STI. The carbon hood, the flares, the wheels, the coilovers, the rotors, the pads, the seats, all the other stuff I've done to the car. I don't necessarily count a lot of that because a lot of it is aftermarket stuff that I wanted to add to the car as a personal touch. But just to get the car running and driving again, from it being a blown up kind of clapped out STI to having an engine setup like this that's going to do 400 to 450 horsepower fairly reliably, cost of the car was $8,000. And the total cost for parts came in at about $21,792.67, totaling to about $29,792. 07 STI with 158,000 miles. But on the bright side, it has a fresh engine and it'll make some power fairly nicely. I do want to reiterate this again, because when it comes to buying these cars blown up, you're taking not just a gamble on the engine, but you're also taking a gamble on the body, the suspension, the chassis, potential rust. Obviously, I would hope you check for rust before you purchase the car. Interior bits broken, exterior bits broken, does it need paint, does it need touch-up, things like that. You can quickly end up spending way more on a blown-up version of these cars to get it back to a presentable status of what you could buy a clean used one for very quickly. Like I said, I have seen these 04 to 07 STIs in, I'm gonna say normal condition, where they've been driven every day, they have standard wear and tear, they have 100 to 200,000 miles, somewhere in that range. I've seen them selling locally and nationally between 12 and like $17,000 for ones that still have like OEM setup engines with maybe a couple bolt-ons, maybe I didn't even factor the access port into that. That's another like what, 650 bucks. So we're essentially over $30,000 on this car, but you can quickly become engulfed in it. They are project cars, they are obviously projects, but I don't think any of us are really buying STIs or WRXs to save money. I think we're kind of buying them as we just like the cars, we want to be able to keep them on the road, and we just want to be able to enjoy them. So it really depends on where you're coming from. My advice to you is, if you are going to buy one as a project, go through it with a fine-tooth comb as much as you can. I bought this one sight unseen, so I necessarily couldn't check for all of the other broken stuff that was on the car that we ended up finding later on. But if you're not crazy mechanically inclined, and you're not going to be doing the work yourself, I'd highly advise just buying one that's already running, already driving. Obviously do the basic things to make sure that it's good: compression test, leak down test. If it has an access port, go through and make sure that the modifications match the tune that's on the access port, because a lot of people will try to park these cars out, and then you yourself may end up with a blown up STI that you just want to offload to somebody else, and then the cycle just repeats itself. So I hope that kind of gives you guys a little bit more clarification and answers the question. If you're just buying one, putting it back to OEM spec, I'd say expect to spend around $12,000 to $13,000, including the price of the car and the parts if you're doing the labor yourself. If you're paying a shop to do it, I'd anticipate spending another $3,000 to $4,000 on top of that. Or if you're just somebody who's not mechanically inclined and you just want one of these cars, between that $12,000 and $16,000 price point, I've seen some pretty decent units out there. But that is all I've got for you guys on this one. I hope that answers your question for this car. We are almost wrapped up with this thing. Like I said, all it really needs is paint. I have 2 more Defi gauges coming for this car. We'll get all of the Defi gauges installed in this thing. We'll get it tuned, and then I'm just going to be enjoying this car up until the point where it may grenade or detonate and take out the short block, and then we'll put a build block in there to rotate it, set up, and send it to the moon. But like I said, that's all I got for you guys. So if you liked the video, you know what to do. Go and hit that like button. Black, blue, green, yellow, purple, silver, cyan, whatever color it turns for you. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to be, put it in one of these corners. No idea which one quite yet, but with that, I will catch you guys in the next one. So peace out, homies. Woo!